What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit PODcast. That is not which podcast this is. This is actually Before the Roar. Welcome to Before the Roar, your preview podcast over at prideofdetroit.com, where we take a look at the Lions' upcoming opponent for this week. Morgan, this week we have the traditional Thanksgiving game where the Lions will be squaring off against the Green Bay Packers. There is a lot of history, obviously, between these two franchises. Obviously, the Thanksgiving game is one where the entire nation is going to be watching. But also, this game has a lot of stakes when it comes down to not only the division race, but also eventually playoff seeding as well. So we're going to talk about everything that the Lions need to do in order to make sure that they can kind of get a get-back game against the Packers, as well as what things they need to be mindful of that the Packers may be trying to do to them, both on the offensive and defensive end. But before we get into that, my guy, first of all, how are you? Like, it's been a crazy week. It's Tuesday when we normally do this on a Wednesday. Like, I'm kind of all over the place right now.
Too, man, and like it clicked for me because this is a crazy stretch of days. You have this game, obviously, then we get the Thursday game next week against the Cowboys at home. So there's a bunch of games at home. Someone had asked Dan Campbell about it, and he was like, "I love it." Like, you could tell he was like, "Yeah, this is pretty." Because they asked him, this is the second time in a row you've had Thursday, coming off Thanksgiving, and it's a lot. So we're rolling with it. Moving on after that win against the Giants. And I'm excited. I like that you said it's a traditional. This really does feel like a classic game. And it's cool now because there's so much riding on it, right, Meko, in terms of, the NFC North and just playoff seeding in general, right?
Yeah, currently the Packers are still second in the division at 7-3-1. They're coming off a pretty important win for them as well, beating the Minnesota Vikings 23-6. And that has put the Packers at basically 500 over their last 4 games. Morgan, they've lost 2 games consecutively to both Carolina and Philly, but have since got back to their winning ways, beating both the Giants and Vikings the last couple weeks. And so this really does set up, like I said, a really important game for both of these teams. But I really do have to wonder, when you're dealing with a team that lost 2 consecutively and now has won 2, it does kind of make you wonder which version of this Packers team are you going to get? Because I think you look at maybe them losing to Philly isn't a huge shock, but losing to Carolina at that time was absolutely a shock to a number of people.
I mean, they've had a couple games like that, like they lost to the Browns. They tied the Cowboys like early in the season when the Cowboys were still, they're figuring things out like everybody. So really the Packers are kind of like a lot of these teams in that tier of the NFC right now, in my opinion. Like they're dangerous. They can be really good, but there's some inconsistencies, similar to the Lions. Yeah, they've had some, you highlighted it. They've had some funky wins. They've had some impressive wins or some funky losses, but they handled the Lions in week 1. But then we just ran down the list of some of their hiccups so far. So yeah, I do like to, this is the point of the podcast, and we're going to get into what version of the Packers we think the Lions are going to get, because there's been some mixed messages, right?
Yeah, I think the last couple weeks that we've seen this Packers team, they've looked very good defensively, not as prolific offensively. And I think that's one thing that I think if you're a Lions fan going to this game, like I would kind of already start to gear my mind towards that this is probably going to look probably more so like the Philly game. Like I think you were hoping that it probably looks more like the Philly game than it probably will look like the Giants game over that happened a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I would think so. I think it's going to be a slugfest, because there's a lot we talked about. There's a lot riding on this game. So yeah, I do think it's going to be, both teams have had this one circled for a while, whether Packers fans want to admit it or not. They handled the Lions in week 1 for sure. It was an impressive win, but things have changed a little bit now, right, Meko? Like there's been some ups and some downs, and this is kind of when the teams that are going to rise to the top ahead of the playoffs start, like, hopefully getting hot, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good transition. And when you talk about like both of these, like some things have changed for both of these teams. Both of these teams have sustained major injuries to key parts of their offensive line. The Packers had to put Elton Jenkins on IR. The Lions had to put Sam Laporta and Christian Mahogany both on IR. Both are likely out for the season. Meanwhile, the Packers also had to put Tucker Kraft on IR. So like both teams have lost offensive weapons and have had to lean, I think, more so on their defense than I think either team probably initially thought they would. I think obviously the Packers knew they were getting a boost by having Micah Parsons. And since that week one matchup, Micah's been able to get fully ingrained into this defense. And we're going to talk about what that means and how that has really kind of impacted this defense as well. But I think another thing that has it has changed, at least from the week one matchup, in my opinion, is that the offensive line does seem to be like have a rhythm at times. It maybe isn't consistent week to week, but there does seem to be much more trust amongst that group, even with Coyote in there, these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and they've had success sporadically. That's my complaint on the running game. There's been times like the Tampa Bay game or the Giants game where or the game against the Commanders where they've just ran all over opponents. And then there's been other games where typically they've lost, where the running game has just been clunky. There's too many negative plays. So you name it. And that's where they really need to get this ironed out, because if they are going to, hopefully they continue to gel in terms of pass protection. But one thing that can help a leaky pass pro is running the ball efficiently often, being consistent with it, because you do that and it's a quarterback and it's a, protection unit's best friend. So something to keep in mind moving forward. But do you think this is I've heard this a couple times, Miko, do you think this is like a must-win game?
It's a must win for my blood pressure. I'll say that. Like, in order for me to be like calm going forward through like the next couple of weeks of the season, we talked about this a little bit on the main podcast. And I think if you're talking mathematically, no, it's not a must win game, right? Like the Lions could technically afford to lose this game and still find a way into the playoffs, especially if they're able to win out and all of those types of things. I still feel like it is a must win to me because I just don't want to get any further behind the eight ball. And I think losing a game in your conference is already bad, but losing a game to someone in your division is even worse. Like, we start talking about losing to the Packers twice. Now you're going to probably be hoping that the Bears can beat the Packers twice, and then that you can obviously beat the Bears to even have a chance at winning the division. And selfishly, I want to three-peat as division champs. Like, selfishly, I really want that. Does it mean anything in the scope of them winning the Super Bowl? No, but it's something that like I would just love to be able to see the Lions do in my lifetime.
No, I would love to see the three-peat too. So I'm right there with you in lockstep. And yeah, mathematically, it's not a must win, but for the North, it almost is, because I don't want to cheer for the Bears, man. That feels gross. Only to play them in week 18. So
Exactly.
I don't want to do that. So yeah, let's just take care of business here at Thanksgiving, man. Let everybody enjoy their meal, be happy, and yeah, let's get a dub. So I'm excited to get into it. We're going to get into some injury reports right now.
Yeah, let's go ahead and break down injury report. Obviously, for the Packers side of things, I think like the biggest injury is the one that I mentioned not too long ago. Elton Jenkins going on IR is easily the most significant injury that they've had to deal with in recent weeks. We're going to talk about how impactful that has been to them when we start talking about the Lions defense going against this Packers offense later in the podcast. But looking at the injury report as of Tuesday, there's a couple of guys who haven't practiced. Carl Brooks, Lucas Van Ness, two guys on their defensive line have registered 2 do not practice days. However, Lucas Van Ness was active last week, so it's a possibility that this is just a rest because it's a short week. So why continue to have guys who maybe have ailments or have things that are nagging, try and get them going for a practice when you know they're going to have to play again in only a couple of weeks? A couple of other things to be mindful of. Again, maybe not necessarily going to be inactive for games, but just to be mindful of. Josh Jacobs, who was out last week, has registered 2 limited practices this week. I would be fully expecting him to play this week, Morgan. And then I think Jaden Reed is the other one that a lot of people are probably keeping an eye on in terms of if he's going to play this week. He's been out for most of the season, and I think they have to activate him either this week or next week from IR for him to be able to be eligible to play this season.
Yeah, I think you're right as far as Reed goes. I can't remember off the top if it's a week or 2 from now. But yeah, overall, they're in a similar position to the Lions. They're missing some important players, obviously, to long-term injuries, but they might be getting Josh Jacobs being back would be huge. That would be a big boost. He's one of the best backs in football. I always like to reiterate that fact whenever we when the Lions play the Packers. But overall, pretty healthy. And yeah, that's the Josh Jacobs thing is do you think that's as big a boost as I do, Miko?
I think so. I think Josh Jacobs hasn't been having the greatest season, especially in comparison to what he did last year, right?
For sure.
And again, we can probably get into that a little bit more later on, but I do think it's a huge boost, even though they did have Emmanuel Wilson last week have a pretty good game. I think he went over 100 yards, had 2 touchdowns. It still isn't going to like replace what a Josh Jacobs can bring. And it's another thing that this Lions defense is going to have to contend with if he's active and if he's getting a full workload come Thursday. Jumping over to the Lions injury report, I think for the most part, nothing that should be too surprising to anyone. I think on the positive side of things, both Miles Frazier and Marcus Davenport have been elevated to full participants in practice over the last 2 days. They have both been like dangerously close to being ready, and I think they actually do have to be activated this week. Miles Frazier for sure does. I don't think Marcus Davenport technically has to be, but the fact that he's registered 2 practices is more than likely enough to get him some playing snaps on Thursday. In addition to that, Khalif Raymond, who did leave the game against the Giants with an ankle injury, hasn't practiced so far this week. Morgan, any feeling that you have about whether you think Khalif is likely to give it a shot this week, or do you think that like whatever it was that kept him out of the game is probably going to keep him out this week as well?
I think they might play it safe with Khalif and, just let him get healthy. He's an older guy. Well, not older, but football old. I don't want to disrespect the man on the podcast, but yeah, overall, Lions are trending in a good direction, in my opinion. I know the list is still long, but like Davenport and Frazier would be big boosts. Like, I don't know that Frazier's going to start immediately or anything like that, but just having a reserve lineman that has flexibility and play different positions. Davenport would obviously be a big boost to the defense. I know people have their opinions on him. I don't think the Lions are just going to hand him 60 snaps like they do with Aiden. I think he'll be a part, but he'll be a part of the platoon. Like if he's 15 to 20 productive snaps, then that helps against a Packers ground game that is getting Josh Jacobs back this week, or so we think. So yeah, overall, Panay being limited. I think Graham, that's probably just maintenance. Graham's again on the wrong side of 30. And the Paschal thing, we talked about it before we jumped on. That doesn't feel good to me, just because we know he's this is the end of his window this week. So he was a full participant Monday and then did not practice Tuesday. So we don't want to speculate too much, but overall that can't be a great sign, right, Meko?
It doesn't seem like it. You would think that the Lions would want to get him. I mean, it's similar to Davenport and Frazier. Like you would hope that he would be stacking those back-to-back days. It's always the possibility that maybe it is just a maintenance day. Maybe it is whatever that he's been dealing with. Maybe there was just a little bit of a flare-up. And so they decided to give him the day off. But yeah, well, I think that's something that, because his window is pretty much like he has to either be activated or not this week, we'll probably find out something between tomorrow or probably game day, I'm assuming is how soon we'll find something out when it comes to Josh Paschal. So that's pretty much going to do it for the injury report portion of the show. Morgan, like you said, nothing too surprising, I think, one way or the other. But with that said, let's transition over to the Lions offense going up against this Packers defense that in week 1, they struggled mightily. Like there's no sugarcoating that. There's no way of dancing around that. How do you think this Lions offense is going to fare in their second matchup with Green Bay now that they've had a little bit more time to get some chemistry, specifically with that offensive line?
So there's more chemistry. Obviously, Mahogany's still out, but you have Coyote Iwashika at left guard, and he had a tough time against New York, to put things mildly. Like he had a tough time, a couple reps, and there were quick pressures. And as we know, that quick pressure straight up the middle, like that interior pressure, that's a killer for most quarterbacks, but especially one who is limited in how much escapability he has. That's what Green Bay did in week 1. And you have to have answers for that, right, Meko? Like it's, like last week, if you watched any of the Green Bay game, they started messing around where they had Parsons standing up behind the nose tackle. Excuse me, my brain just short circuited. The zero tech, and he was just picking which gap he wanted to run through. And if the Lions are having trouble, that's it. Say what you will about Parsons, he's a dynamic rusher. They're going to move him around. You have to, if you're Dan Campbell, you have to have answers to when they do start heating Goff up, whether it's max protect, like keeping extra people in, you going 6 offensive linemen and helping out over there, whatever you need to do. But you need to give Goff a little more time than they gave him in week 1 Otherwise, I think if you can't get the ground game going, then the offense it's going to be tough to move the ball, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's one of the things that I'm most concerned about is, again, has this offense, like this interior of this offensive line, really figured out things when it comes down to dealing with that quick pressure and dealing with guys like Micah Parsons that are essentially a chess piece and can be moved across this defensive line? Like how much better has the communication gotten? And I think we've seen it throughout the season in spots where it has been very clean, but I think having those different elements and those different wrinkles to the Packers defense is going to put a lot of pressure on like someone like Graham and making sure that he's being, clear and communicating with both Ratledge and Coyote to make sure that, like, hey, we know who's picking up who, make sure that you're not overcommitting one way or the other so that we don't have, linebackers just easily, blitzing through the middle of your offensive line. When we go back to week one, like I said, there's no sugarcoating like that. This was really difficult and pedestrian offensive performance. This is an offense that only generated 13 points for that game, only generated 246 total yards, which is very underperforming for this Lions offense. 200 yards passing, 46 yards rushing. I think one of the things that's most telling about like things just weren't going the Lions' way, the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery both only generated 2.1 and 2.3 yards per carry, respectively, for each of them. But Morgan, there's one thing that is a little bit interesting when you jump back into those numbers, because while Jared Goff was sacked 4 times, and while he did throw an interception in that game, I still find it interesting that he had like over 3 seconds to throw throughout that game. He was only pressured on like 28% of his passes and was still able to complete like almost 80% of his passes. It's really odd to like kind of look back at those numbers and be like, wow, this offense wasn't able to get anything going.
Yeah, it was like a failure to launch from the beginning, man. And we know, especially now, like there's been years of data to back it. Like, yes, the passing game matters for the Lions, but it all starts with how they run the football. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise you face these fronts that are so talented and can heat up the quarterback oftentimes with just four rushers. It just opens you up to Pandora's box of horrors on the offensive side of the ball. Like it's tough to deal with, especially when you have rushers like you're going against a Parsons or a Myles Garrett, that kind of thing. So the Packers did a good job of just bottling up everything downfield. The running game killed because they were trying to establish it, but 2.1 and 2.3 yards respectively between Gibbs and Monty. That's not going to get it done. And then it trickled down into third down, right, Miko? They went 5 of 15 on third down that first round against Green Bay. So I like that you brought up communication though, because hopefully, they've had time to gel. Like Tate Ratledge is really coming on, in my opinion. So in a calm environment and a nice tranquil setting in Ford Field where it's quiet when the Lions are on offense, I hope that helps a good amount, because they did say it was really loud in Lambeau that first week,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and hopefully the Lions can give Green Bay a taste of their own medicine in that regard as well. When I think we look at how Green Bay's defense has been performing so far this year, again, they've lived up to the billing of being a very good defense, especially I think the addition of Micah Parsons has really helped out a ton. When you look at their weighted DVOA rankings, first of all, this defense is 10th overall, 11th against the pass, 21st against the run, which is really interesting because like they've been holding teams to about 3 point yards per rush so far this season. So like they've been making it difficult on teams. However, they have had some weeks where they've kind of like not performed nearly as well, specifically looking at like their last couple of games. Last week they gave up 4.6 yards per carry versus Minnesota. And then against Carolina, they gave up 4.9. And over the 3 of their last 4 games, they've allowed over 100 yards of rushing. So a difficult team to run against, but doesn't seem like it's impossible, Morgan.
Yeah, and you got to commit to it, because in my opinion that's the first step in slowing down this pass rush we keep talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's step number 1 and 2, really, to be honest with you. Run the ball and then run the ball again. So if you can get that going, it takes the bite out of some of that pass rush that we've seen, because that's what's really getting it done for them. Their secondary, when you watch them play, they can play really aggressively because
Mm-hmm.
they know they don't got to cover for that long. And I'm sure that's a nice feeling for a defensive back, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think they're having really good play from 2 of their cornerbacks, specifically looking at Carrington, Valentine, and Keyshawn Nixon. two guys that have been playing really well. Valentine has only allowed five completions on 41 yards, or five completions for 41 yards on 19 targets when he's been in man coverage. And then Nixon has 14 passes defended on 60 targets, which is second in the NFL as of right now. So, like, again, a stingy secondary as well. But I mean, I think a lot of fans are going to be focused on that defensive line and like you're saying, getting the running game going early to be able to limit the type of impact they can have when it comes down to getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, because they got multiple guys that can do it too. They got Parsons has 10 sacks, Gary has another 7.5, and Devontae Wyatt, the Georgia guy, has 4. So yeah, man, they got juice. So that's got to be the first step. They have been giving up more yards over the last couple weeks, though, right? So 4.6 yards per carry against Minnesota, almost 4.9 against Carolina, giving up over 100 yards rushing in 3 of their last 4 games. So that gives me a little bit of hope, because if the Lions can get that going,
Yeah.
then we might be cooking, right?
No, I'm right there with you. I think that's the thing where, especially coming out of that Giants game where Jameer really kind of went off, like it does make me feel like while it may be some tough yardage that you're going to get, it is something that Dan Campbell's going to have to commit to. And it's something where maybe this is a game where you lean more heavily on David Montgomery and you really try to allow him to get you guys going, maybe to even start this game to soften up that defensive front so that you can deploy Jameer in maybe some more unique ways outside of just having to try and do the exact same thing that you did against the Giants. Maybe hit Green Bay with something that they haven't seen.
Yeah, I like the idea of, you want to get Jameer touches, advocating for Jameer not to get touches. But if you want to run the ball maybe 30, 35 times, that'd be fun too, spread it out a little bit, because it'd be a game. I like that you brought up Monty, because he should be fresh too, man, that he hasn't been getting as many touches. That happens when you're playing with a player as special as Jameer Gibbs,
Go ahead and say it. Go ahead and say it. The best running back in football. When you're playing with the best running back in football, you're not going to get as many touches as you probably used to get in past seasons when he was just a young pup.
Yep. And we say that with respect to Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley, but we're just talking about this season, man. And if you're watching the Lions play, I think it'd be hard to disagree with us. So, and we know that Jonathan Taylor especially is having a really special year this year. So yeah, I think they still need to, and that's where I'm happy that Dan's calling plays, because he relies a little bit more on play action where, that's Goff's bread and butter. So that kind of gives me hope too, because there was a lot of drop back and pass against Green Bay the first time around, and it just did not suit the Lions well in the moment.
Right. Well, I mean, like, again, we talked about it earlier where it's like, man, he had so much time to throw, wasn't getting a ton of pressure, had a high completion percentage. How do you only generate 13 points? And I think you start to look at other numbers from like next gen stats, things like that, and you start to see like they dink and dunk their way down the field in a number of situations. And I do think that is a lot to do with how Green Bay chooses to cover teams, right? They're one of the teams that use cloud coverage, which for anyone who doesn't know what cloud coverage is, it's kind of like a mix of cover 2 and cover 6. They use that more than any other team in the NFL on pass attempts. So they're really trying to limit what you can do as far as big playability, and they're going to allow you to pick up those yards underneath because they trust their linebackers, because they trust their corners to be able to come up and tackle. But to your point, with Dan taking over play calling responsibilities, like I do want to see him be a little bit more bold. And I would like to see him and Jared get on the same page where, like, hey, they may try and play that coverage, but we got to find plays that allow us to take more shots down the field. I believe it was Ryan that brought it up in our last, no, I think it was Jeremy who brought it up in the main podcast, that the Lions just haven't had a lot of explosive plays so far this season. And if you go all the way back to that first matchup, they only had 4. And that's crazy to me, Morgan, when you have a guy like Jamison Williams on your team.
Yeah, and Jameer Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So they got to test it, and they do play a lot of zone coverage, like Meko said, and where it's like they're rallying to the football, but you got to have some rack, right? Like I do want them to test them vertically, because you need to soften them up eventually. But it's going to be a game where your ball carriers and your receivers have to do things once they get the ball in their hands, because you got to force a missed tackle here or there. They did a good job of that against the Giants, but the Packers defense is definitely a couple tiers better than the Giants, safe to say, with no disrespect. I'm excited to watch it, man. They only used it. I liked this stat that we threw in there, the play action on 23% of their plays.
Mm-hmm.
That first time, I'd like to see that be like 40 or 50, to be
I
honest
was
with
gonna
you.
that was one of the biggest takeaways from the Commanders game was that they used play action, I think, on like 51% of their drop back passes. Like, and again, maybe the lack of run success is what attributed to the lack of play action. But to your point earlier, if you just keep with it, even if it is 3.9 yards a carry or whatever the case may be, do what you need to do so that you can hopefully set up the pass, right? Like, and obviously that's going to require the Lions to not fall behind in this game, for them not to have, turnovers in certain situations. But I don't think the Lions, the last couple of games, they've looked very disjointed to me, Morgan, when it comes down to their offense. I don't think this is a game where you can expect Jared Goff to go in there and throw it 45 or even 40 times and expect to still win this game. Like, I do think you're going to need more from your ground attack.
Yeah, and for all the reasons we mentioned through this whole segment, right? Like you don't want to, because in my opinion, that's going to lead to more just strictly like drop, third and longs where you're not in play action. It's just you're dropping back in a 7-step drop or in the gun and throwing it, and that's tough because then you're asking the offensive line to protect 40 to 45 times. And
Yeah.
that's a tough ask, man. Like Panay says, he always wants to move forward, not backwards. I feel that.
I completely understand that, and I think that's exactly what this Lions offense is going to need. But we also got to talk about what this Lions defense is going to need to do as well, because while Green Bay's offense hasn't been explosive the last couple of weeks, they still have the possibility of being dangerous. So we need to definitely look at this Lions defense and talk about what they need to do to make sure that Green Bay's offense stays a sleeping giant for the time being. So we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more right after this. And welcome back to Before the Roar, your preview podcast over here at prideofdetroit.com. Morgan, in that first segment, we talked about everything the Lions offense needs to do in terms of getting the run game going, in terms of being bold in the passing attack and finding different ways of being able to attack the Packers defense. We also got to talk about what the Lions defense is going to do to be able to make sure that this Packers offense stays a non-issue, because I would say over the last couple of weeks, it's kind of been that when you look at some of the games that they've had against some of their opponents, over the last few weeks, not a ton of points. I believe they had 27 against the Giants, but every other game outside of that, they haven't really been lighting up the scoreboard. And I think if you're a Lions fan, like, that's kind of what you're going to hope continues. But there are some issues and there are some threats that the Lions have to be aware of, right?
Yeah, and the loss of Tucker Kraft for them was huge because he was having a big year. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
Love's safety blanket. He made a lot of plays after the catch. He was really, really good after the catch. So losing him was big, but they still have a bunch of skill guys that, can put some fear into some defensive coaches. Getting Jaden Reed back would be a big boost for them just because that's somebody who can, similar skill set, not identical to like what Wan'Dale Robinson was doing against the Lions
Yeah.
this past week. But with that said, it does, with the release of Arthur Millette and a couple of those other guys that the Lions, we're recording this Tuesday, they are getting healthier on the back end. So we'll see if that helps anything going forward. But yeah, it's still I like that you use the term sleeping giant because I know I hate the Packers as much as everybody, guys, but it's still a really talented team. And yeah, you don't want to be the team that allows them to get going. So hopefully it'd be cool if they can we say it every week, but got to start with making them one dimensional, right, Miko? We can't let Josh Jacobs get rolling.
No, not at all. And I think the Lions did a really good job of that in the first matchup, right? Holding the Packers to 266 total yards, 188 yards passing, but only 78 yards rushing, with 66 of those going to Josh Jacobs. So that in itself was a good outing from this defense. But where they kind of faltered, no sacks, no turnovers, and they did allow a number of explosive plays. They allowed 7 total plays of 15 yards or more in that game. And those are the types of plays, Morgan, that flip the field for you, and even if they don't always generate points, it just keeps your defense on the field that much longer.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad day defensive. Like the Lions' struggles in week one were definitely more so on the offense. The defense did pretty good. Like to your point, like they really didn't. They allowed a few big plays. Like a couple times. I remember when we broke that down, the Packers just had the perfect play call to what the Lions were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that one time where it looked like Kirby bit, but it wasn't. It was he was supposed to drive on that end breaker, and they caught the Lions deep. So hopefully that doesn't happen this week. Hopefully you can and bottle that up and keep things in front of you, because I think if you do that, they really have looked. I think to use the word disjointed earlier,
Yeah.
and that's really what it's looked like. Because it's similar to the Lions, not one for one, but so much talent, and yet it's been kind of like a sputtering mess at times.
Yeah, especially the last couple weeks. And I think that's what makes their DVOA numbers really weird to me, because like you look at those last couple of weeks, especially how they've been performing. And, we're going to get to Jordan Love in a little bit here, but like it hasn't looked as prolific as their DVO rankings say they are. They're fifth overall in DVOA. They're third in passing, 13th in rushing. I don't know about you, but like that's just not what I've seen the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you wonder if they were like boosted when they were really clicking earlier in the season, like when
Mm-hmm.
Kraft was healthy and everyone was like they had everyone at full go. So yeah, because really it just hasn't been consistent for all the stuff we're talking about the Lions offense. Like I'm sure Green Bay fans are having similar discussions in Wisconsin. And again, another divisive player probably among NFL fans across the country, right, Meko? But like Jordan Love continues to it looks up and down, but then you look at his numbers, it's 2,560 yards, 15 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. So that looks good, right? Like I don't,
Yeah.
but there's people that are, down, quote unquote, down on Jordan Love. And that's kind of surprising to me right now.
Well, I think he's having like an efficient season. I don't know that he's having like for them to be 7-3-1. I don't know if I can say it's because Jordan Love is playing great football. He's playing efficient football. He's playing mistake-free football. Like the fact that you only have 3 interceptions on the season is awesome, right? Anyone would love that from their quarterback. And I think he's doing certain things well within the confines of this offense, but there are other things when you like specifically, we can look at his last 4 games, Morgan. Looking at the last 4 games alone, if I told you that he only had 762 total passing yards over that time span, only 2 touchdowns, and has completed only 62% of his passes, like, would you be thrilled about Jordan Love?
Well, yeah, no, I guess not. That's pretty, because you would think, because LaFleur, like it or not, really good play caller, good offensive mind. So yeah, I get some of that Wisconsin frustration that's going on over there, because especially over that last stretch. I like that you brought that up, Miko. Like they're like that's a month sample size, so a decent chunk of football. Yeah, that's interesting. And then something else that we talked about was how aggressive he is on third down, despite like some of the some of those shortcomings here the last month. Currently has
Mm-hmm.
the highest air yards per attempt on third down, so 11 and a half yards per attempt this season. I think that's pretty substantial, because the Lions did get got a couple times on third and long against the Giants.
Yeah, and it's something that Jeremy pointed out on the main podcast the other day is that it's something that this defense has struggled with all season. And that is one of the things when we're talking about like what makes this matchup against the Packers so difficult. It's that aspect of their offense that they're not afraid to challenge teams, deep on the field. And when you have weapons like Christian Watson, who's back from injury, when you have Romeo Dobbs, and if they get Jaden Reed back, like that's another guy. But Watson for the season is averaging 16.6 yards per reception. Dobbs is averaging 12.7. I think Jaden Reed is like upwards of 15 yards per reception as well. That puts a lot of stress on your secondary. And this is where, for me, Morgan, like this is where the defensive line has to pick it up. It's something that they've been kind of not bad at, but like they haven't been as aggressive as I think a lot of fans would like them to be, specifically when it comes down to getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, and they're banged up, right? Like so, since Jenkins went on IR, they've allowed the third highest pressure rate in the NFL at 43%. Since that time, too, Love's been sacked 7 times in the last 4 games with 54 total pressures. This is all according to Next Gen Stats. So, and what do we know about coverage and rush? That's married together, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, with all that, I totally agree with you. The D line does need to have a big game in order to help out. The secondary's got to do its part too, man. There's a couple of times people were out of position last week. against the Giants. I know they were kind of hitting the Lions over the head
Yeah.
with like the kitchen sink in terms of trick plays, but Green Bay will run some misdirection too. Like, I don't know that they're going to do the reverse pass and throw it to Jordan Love like the Giants did, but I do
Mm-hmm.
think they're going to see that on tape and be like, okay, to your point, I do think they're going to test this defense down the field vertically, because especially with no Kirby Joseph, because Green Bay knows who Kirby Joseph is. And, it looks like he's trending towards not playing, according to who, I forget who said that, but I think Dan did, maybe. I don't
Yeah, I
know.
think Dan said it during
Okay.
his press conference today that it's more than likely that we probably won't see Kirby this week. And yeah, I think that is an issue and something that the Lions fans have to be aware of, is that without having someone as talented and as freakishly athletic as Kirby, like you and I were talking about before we started recording, I think Kirby is probably the best single high safety in the NFL, period. Like no one plays single high as well as Kirby Joseph does. And I always think back to the play that he made last year. I believe it was against Minnesota. It may not have been. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But where he was like on the far right hash and was able to literally pivot his hips and be able to make an interception on the other side of the field in like one motion. That's something that this Lions defense has been missing. And I think it's something that teams like Green Bay could potentially take advantage of, especially when the Lions are like, Morgan, the Lions are the slowest team in creating pressure in the NFL. And that's mind boggling to me because they also have like the ninth most pressures in the NFL and they have the eighth most sacks. So like they're getting there. They're just like taking the tortoise and the hare approach to getting there.
Yeah, and this is the game where it can't. I'm not as worried about Love running around as much as some of these other quarterbacks that the Lions have played lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think this is a game where if you do get a third and obvious, hopefully you can scheme up a one-on-one for Aiden or an Aleem, because their interior offensive line is banged up, or, Tyleek or whoever it needs to be. Roy Lopez has been playing his butt off, man. Shout out to Roy Lopez, my
Seriously.
guy. So that's where it needs to start, because to your point, like, you don't want to give Love all the time in the world and then have him either draw a stupid 55-yard defensive pass interference or get some of what New York was getting last week with some of those 50-50 balls, and just the receivers making a really, shout out to those Giants receivers, though. They were making excellent adjustments when the ball was in the
Yeah.
air. And that's tough to do. If people are listening to this, they're like, yes, it is. If you know what I mean. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something to keep an eye on. How pertinent do you think? Like, it's got to be another game. I think we mentioned it earlier. They got to stop the run. That's got to where it has to start, right, Miko?
Yeah, I think if Josh Jacobs is healthy for this game, all attention has to go there. Like you do have to get them into third and long situations where it's obvious passing downs. But if I can just as easily find, if you and I can just as easily find the stats where that's showing that, like, hey, when they get to those situations, when they get to third down, that they're looking to take shots, they're not just looking to move the chains. You do have to look at the rest of your defensive line and say, hey, heat him up. Like, don't allow him to be able to survey the field. We don't want our corners having to cover for 3 seconds and expecting, our whether it's man to man or zone coverage to hold up in that amount of time. The thing that you mentioned earlier about like not really being worried about Jordan Love running, this is a game where if I see the defensive line just be more aggressive and like they're winning early and that leads to maybe a scramble here or there, I will take that more than I want to just have to sit there and be like, I think Jordan Love is having a picnic in the pocket right now.
I'm not going to argue against that, because if you look at it, like, what's hurting you more, 16-yard scramble that converts a 3rd and 8 or a 62-yard touchdown? So I'm not going to argue you there, because I understand that logic. So it could be one of those games, because we're not arguing that he's not athletic. For who Packers fans watching this, we know he's a really good athlete. We're just saying he's not Lamar or some of the other quarterbacks the Lions have played so far
Well,
this season.
and I still think it would have to be a pretty obvious like broken play for Jordan Love to even take a run. And I think that's where you can also, Morgan, maybe this is a game where you do put a little bit more on your linebackers in terms of spying. So whether that's Derek Barnes, I think they did that with Derek Barnes against Lamar, and there was someone else earlier this year where they did do that and they still were able to get pressure, but just put you have 3 great linebackers. You have 4 now that Malcolm's back. Like, if you want to do that with Malcolm or whatever the case may be, but I do think this defensive line has to turn it up. I've said it yesterday on the main podcast. I can't think of the last time I saw Aiden take so long to generate pressure. And it feels like it's not just like, I don't think it's just like a lingering injury. I do feel like it's somewhat scheme, and we've talked about this in other weeks. But I think this is one of those weeks where like that scheme of like, hey, we're going to allow slow pressure to get there. We're just going to constrict the pocket. You need to throw that out and allow your playmakers to win early, especially now that you have a lean back and now that they're having issues with keeping Jordan Love upright in the first place. Try and get that early pressure up the middle.
Yep, that's where it's on Shep and the coaching staff too, Casey Rogers and them to get try to scheme up one-on-ones, because to your point, yeah, like Aiden, it's taking a while, but then you watch it on tape and he's getting chipped by the tight end, he's getting chipped by the running back. They're lining up a tight end in line out, so it's widening his angles. So he's getting a lot of attention, but at the same time, man, you got paid. It's time to make them plays. I don't care how much attention you're getting. Go make a play, man. Myles Garrett does it. So go do
I
it.
was gonna say that's the fine print once you sign that major contract, is like, hey, by the way,
Go.
you about to get chipped a lot.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you will never see another one-on-one a day in your life now that you got this type of money. With that said, man, let's move over to our X factors of the game. I think there are a number of players and position groups that we could highlight, but for me personally, I talked about it in the first segment when talking about what this offense may need to get going. I do think they need to lean on David Montgomery, and you made a really good point about the fact that he's been fresh. They haven't been using him a ton, mainly because Ja has been having some really good performances. This does feel like one of those games where if it's going to be a street fight, not only do I think that suits David Montgomery's style better, I also just want to keep Jahmyr Gibbs healthier down the stretch. So don't allow him to have, a lot of these plays where he's running in the middle of that tough defensive line or having to try and evade a Micah Parsons or Edrin Cooper out on the edge. Give it to Knuckles and allow him to kind of beat guys up in the middle of that offensive and defensive line.
No, I like that, man. If Monty can get going and then you get Jahmyr going too, then that would be a way to control the tempo of this game. Because if you're averaging 5 yards a pop and getting chunks here and there, then that means you're winning the time of possession battle most likely. And as we know, that's a good thing for this iteration of the Detroit Lions, possessing that football. And that's the ultimate way to just, keep an offense in check, right? Just keep them off the field.
Exactly. And then when we flip it over to the defensive side, like for me, I'm going to put a lot of onus on the secondary. I know we talked about the defensive line needing to be able to get good pressure and being able to get quick pressure. I'm skeptical to think that the Lions are going to make a philosophy change when it comes down to how they are trying to create pressure. I think Dan thinks it's successful. I think there's enough numbers in terms of them getting quarterback hits, generating pressure, getting sacks to be like, no, this works. So that puts a lot of onus on the secondary. And I think looking at what happened last week where guys were just maybe a little undisciplined, whether it's Thomas Harper or a Meek having a little bit of an uncharacteristic game, getting beat on crossing routes and things like that, secondary is going to have to tighten it up because this, like you said it earlier, this is a very talented wide receiver group. And while Jordan Love maybe isn't playing like at an MVP or level or anything like that, he's playing consistently. And that's something that the Lions have to find a way to disrupt. And they may have to just do that on the back end.
Yep. And even, he's the arm talent's there. So he can make all the throws off kilter, everything. So it'd be nice to force him into a mistake though. And I guess that kind of pivots into my X factor. So I'll go defense first, switch it up a little.
Okay.
I'm going to go DJ Reed. So
nice.
He got his feet wet again, or he had his feet wet last week against the Giants. Now I think, they have a bunch of really talented skill guys, whether it's Watson, Dobbs, they're getting Jaden Reed back. So if you can get if this is a big game for DJ Reed, in my opinion, just because if he can get a couple PBUs, a pick would be really nice. I think that'd be a major boost because I know it's getting in line with what Meko said with the secondary, but yeah. So obviously I agree with that pick as well. And then offensively, I'm going to go Jared Goff, man. I'm not asking him to do anything crazy. I just want him to operate the offense efficiently, don't get blindsided by anything. Like, I think quick pressures are going to happen. Parsons is going to win his fair share of rushes. Gary might too. That's going to happen. But limit some of that quick pressure and allow Goff to operate the offense, because this would be a nice bounce back to your point, like a little bit of a Jared Goff game. Just hitting the open guy and knowing, because if you're Jared, we talk about this too in the offseason and when we did our film breakdowns. Jared is somebody, he's got to defeat that blitz before the pre-snap, right? He's got to do it pre-snap. He's got to know where to go with the ball, who's hot, where's the blitz coming from, do I need to slide my protection? So that's something I think that's got to be top of mind, and no doubt something Dan Campbell's been spending a lot of time on this week, right?
Absolutely. I think Jared has yet to have one of those games. For me personally, maybe I've overlooked one, but I have yet to see a game that the Lions have had this season where I felt like, yo, that was a Jared Goff game where things weren't working well and he just put the entire offense on his back and made it work. Whether it's like you were saying, just operating the offense as it should be and just being consistent, or taking the shots like we talked about in the first segment as well, like being willing to give Jamison Williams or Isaac Taslaw or someone the chances on some of these deeper routes to go out there and make a play that could really flip the script in the Lions' favor. That is something that I think the Lions absolutely need from Jared Goff in this game, especially coming off, again, a Giants performance where people were a little down on the offensive performance outside of what Jahmyr Gibbs was able to produce for them. So with that said, man, let's move over to score predictions. Currently, the Lions are favored by 2.5 points according to FanDuel. How do you see this one shaking out?
I think it's going to be tight, unfortunately. I think we should all buckle up. It's going to be a close game. But I am going to pick the Lions at home on Thanksgiving. I think it's a big game for them. They know that this whole stretch is big, but this one's a big one, and especially after how week 1 went down. So I'm going to go 24-23 Lions. Close.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't have it nearly as close, but I think it's going to be close despite what my score says. I got the Lions winning this one 21-17. These are two really good defenses, and as much as I would love for the offense to just be humming and getting back to the way that we expect them to play, I do think Green Bay is going to make it tough in a number of areas. You mentioned that there may be a couple quick pressures here or there. I think Micah Parsons is going to have his fair share of wins. I think Rashawn Gary is going to have his fair share of wins. And until I see it happen, that cloud coverage, I think, is going to cause some problems for the Lions early on. And I think hopefully they can make some adjustments even before the game starts. But if not, hopefully by halftime, they can make the proper adjustments that they're going to need to make to be able to get into more scoring positions. But at the end of the day, I do just think that Dan's so good at learning from previous mistakes and getting this team ready and improving from a loss, even especially when you're talking about division opponents. That's the reason why I'm really leaning 21-17 in this situation.
I feel you. It's hard not to trust Dan Campbell, especially I feel like he's just a really an ultimate competitor. So I'm sure he's still got that sour taste in his mouth from early in September. That's why I'm slightly leaning towards the Lions in this one. So I'm excited, man. I'm gonna be there again. I feel like I'm really tired right now, so that feels like a scary moment. But I'm excited I'm gonna get loud. I'm gonna get my voice back. I don't know. It sounds pretty hoarse, but I'm gonna get back by Thursday.
I was gonna say you got a rough couple of weeks between the Giants game that was like all that emotion. You got Thanksgiving, and then you got Cowboys next week. So it's going to be a lot. I'll be definitely keeping you in my prayers, and hopefully that you'll be able to get your voice back in that time. But man, for everyone else, we appreciate you guys taking the time to check out Before the Roar. Like always, if you are looking for any more additional Lions content, you can go over to pridedetroit.com. There are new articles and new updates being posted over there all the time. If you want to stay locked in on injury news, or just like we talked about, we have a couple of guys that should be getting activated possibly within the next day or so. So if you want to see that information and want to be up to date on that, make sure you're locked into the website. If you are watching this over on the YouTube side of things and this is your first time checking out our YouTube channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. We greatly appreciate that, and it helps out the channel immensely. But with all of that said, I'm Meko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you guys in the next one.